Learning to trust God. Learning to trust God, part 2 this morning. If you were here last Sunday, we did part 1, Learning to Trust God, when we looked at Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me? And part of what we reflected on was the truth that even when God seems absent, God is not absent. Even when we do not have the felt presence of God, God is still with us. But learning to trust in the midst of that. If you were here, you might feel like you trusted, that you've done it, that you don't need to learn to trust anymore, and you might want to go for a coffee now, so feel free to do that. If you're like the rest of us, though, it is learning to trust. It's an ongoing thing. None of you are going for coffee, I see. It's learning day by day in the highs and lows of life to trust God. It's an active thing. It's not just a head thing. It's an active thing. And in this story of Moses, a little bit of a recap. So Israel, those who had become Israel as a nation, the Hebrews, had ended up in Egypt. And this was way back when Joseph went there. He of the Technicolor Dreamcoat went there. His family followed. They were loved by the Egyptians. Then after Joseph died, change of Pharaoh, forgot who Joseph was. The Hebrews became larger and larger in number. The Egyptians got more and more scared with that. So they oppressed them. They put them into slavery. They were downtrodden. 400 years in captivity. And it had seemed at the time, my God, why have you forsaken me? But today again we're reminded that God had not forsaken his people. God remembered. God saw. God remembered. And this little baby Moses was raised up. The Pharaoh was killing all the male babies around that time. So put in the basket, put in the water, found by Pharaoh's daughter, raised by Pharaoh's daughter, raised in privilege within Egypt. And at around the age of 40, he was walking around and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew. So, rather rash we might think these days, he killed the Egyptian. Word got out, so Moses fled the area. He went to a place called Midian, which if you think about the Sinai between Egypt, Sinai and Jordan, as you think of the Red Sea coming up to the top like that, near Aqaba, Midian is that kind of region. So quite a long way away. He really fled because the Pharaoh wanted to kill him. And then we hear in Exodus that he met Zipporah, who was to be his wife. And Jethro was the father-in-law. He stayed in that area for around 40 years, and we understand that part of his role was to look after Jethro's sheep. Now one day he was wandering through the desert area, and I love this because I actually have my kibbutz in this very area, so I can really picture the mountains in that area. And he came to this mountain called Horeb, which actually is the same mountain as Mount Sinai, where he was to receive the 10 Commandments. And on seeing this burning bush, God gets his attention. And then God asks him to do something. He calls Moses to go back to the Pharaoh in Egypt and say, let my people go. Would you be scared? You should be scared going back to Pharaohs. They were scary people. They would kill at the blink of an eyelid. So not surprisingly, Moses has a question. Who am I to go? And there's a real emphasis on the word I in this chapter. Who am I to go? And then the most important I, God replies, I will be with you. And then, I love this, I will give you a sign. Don't you want a sign from God? Don't you often want a sign from God? I will give you a sign. When you go back, when you bring the Hebrews out of Egypt, when you get back to this mountain, that will be the sign that I have sent you. Can anybody see the problem with that sign? It looks like it's at the wrong time. I want a sign now. And then I'll do it, God. God says, trust me. We say, I want a sign and I'll trust you. God says often, trust me and I'll give you a sign. Trust me and I'll give you a sign. Think of Peter stepping out of the boat onto the water. He had to actually put his foot on the water before the confirmation was that he would walk on water. We say, give us a sign and I'll trust you. God often says, trust me and I'll give you a sign. I'm going to reflect. A few things come to mind this morning about where this might have applied or might apply to you and to me. Think about a time, maybe even this morning, before you came to believe in Jesus. It took trust for you to explore. I think about people who come on the Alpha course, this 10-week course where people come with all their questions, who don't believe, but they are willing to go on that journey of questioning, of understanding. They have to trust before they believe. And thankfully, it happened to me 23 years ago. Thankfully, some people who go out on that journey in trust find that they find Jesus. We say, give me a sign and I will trust you. God often says, trust me and I will give you a sign. When many people come to that stage where they want to commit, where they want to step out in faith, if they're anything like me, they want a voice from the heavens or lightning. Do you exist, Lord? Show me a sign. And God often says, trust me and I'll show you a sign. I think coming to faith is very much, we want to be seeing is believing. And it ends up being believing and then seeing. I remember saying to somebody in that position years ago, it's a little bit like somebody standing at the side, a child standing at the side of a swimming pool, and the father saying, jump in, trust me, trust me. You have to step out in faith to find out actually that it's all true. Think about calling. Have you ever been called by God? It can be in big ways, it can be in little ways. Maybe God is calling you this morning. Moses was called with this very big role in mind. I remember that sense of calling that I had many years ago. And actually, after testing it, because we have to test the calling, not just God has told me. He might have, but test it, and test it with your church. But after testing that calling for a number of years, it was when we went to this same campsite that we're going to, that I had that sense of, it is now. You need to train for ministry now. And it was a big decision. You might have heard me say that having 3 young daughters and a big mortgage, how could I give up my salary and train to be a minister? And somebody helpfully and scarily said to me, well, it's a little bit like stepping off a cliff financially. And you have to wait to see if the parachute opens. We want a sign now, but God often says, trust me and I'll give you a sign. And thankfully for us as a family, I don't think we've ever had so much money as during that 3 years training. We were really, really, really blessed. How might God be calling you in big ways, in little ways, because they are all important? And after testing that call, might God be saying, trust me, step out, and then you'll know, then you will get that true confirmation. What about serving in church or in the world? But think about serving in church. It takes a lot of courage to work with our wonderful children, with our wonderful older people, with our wonderful people of any age. It takes courage to come and read a lesson. It takes courage for some people who are more shy to welcome on the door. I had a lovely conversation with somebody last week because they are going to have to give talks. And humbly, beautifully, they said to me, "How do you do it, Mike?" And I remembered 20 odd years ago when I was testing my calling, having to preach, and I was shaking. My voice was going. "Lord, if you want me to do it, give me a sign." Trust me, and I'll show you. And you step out in faith, and you learn that you don't crumble. You learn that your world doesn't fall apart. You learn that you can do it. You learn to trust God more and more by doing.